Meet Mark Chen, a devoted single father working 2 jobs to support his young daughter Emma. Still carrying his late wife's dream of creating life-changing technology, he spends his nights tinkering in their cramped garage. His latest invention, a pair of smart glasses that translate visual scenes into sound cues for the blind. After months of setbacks, he finally perfects the device and presents it to Sarah Mitchell, a blind music teacher. As she experiences her first glimpse of the world through sound, something extraordinary happens. But when an unexpected crisis threatens Mark and Emma's future, Sarah discovers these glasses hold the key to helping them in ways Mark never imagined. What hidden strength will Sarah reveal that transforms both their lives forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent light in Mark Chen's garage flickered, casting uneven shadows across his workbench. It was nearly midnight, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. His calloused hands, bearing the marks of endless repair jobs, carefully turned a small screwdriver, adjusting the delicate mechanism before him. A pair of modified safety glasses sat in a cushioned vise, their lenses reflecting the harsh light above. "Just a little more," he whispered, more to himself than to the empty garage. The words hung in the air, mixing with the familiar scents of machine oil and solder that had become as much a part of his nightly routine as his morning coffee. Behind him, pinned to a corkboard, hung a weathered leather journal. Its pages were filled with his late wife Claire's precise handwriting. Diagrams, calculations, and dreams of technology that could change lives. Mark glanced at it, as he did countless times each night, drawing strength from her presence that still lingered in those pages. "Daddy?" A small voice called from the garage doorway. Emma stood there in her butterfly pajamas, clutching her worn, stuffed elephant. At 8 years old, she had her mother's curious eyes and that same determined tilt of the chin that Mark remembered so well. "Hey, sweetheart, another bad dream?" Mark set down his tools and opened his arms. Emma rushed into them, burying her face in his shirt that smelled of workplace cleaning solutions and electronic components. "I heard noises," she mumbled into his chest. "And you weren't in bed." Mark stroked her hair, feeling the familiar twist of guilt in his stomach. "I'm sorry, Em. I got caught up in the project again." He looked at his watch and winced. "Way past your bedtime, kiddo. Let's get you back upstairs." As he carried her back through their modest house, Emma's head resting on his shoulder, Mark's mind drifted to tomorrow's packed schedule. The maintenance job at the office complex started at 7, followed by 3 computer repair house calls he'd squeezed in during his lunch break. The evening would bring more repairs, people's printers, laptops, and tablets that needed fixing to supplement his regular income. He tucked Emma back into bed, making sure her elephant was properly positioned under her arm. "Tell me about Mom's project again," she whispered, fighting to keep her eyes open. Mark sat on the edge of her bed, the springs creaking softly. "Well, your mom was brilliant with computers and electronics. She believed technology could help people see the world in new ways. Before she got sick, she was working on something special, a way to help people who couldn't experience the world through sound." "Like music?" Emma asked, her voice growing drowsy. "Sort of. But instead of just music, it would be like painting pictures with sound. She always said that everyone deserves to see the sunrise, even if they see it differently than we do." Mark's voice caught slightly on the last words, remembering Claire's passionate speeches about accessibility and human potential. Emma's breathing had deepened, sleep finally claiming her. Mark sat there a moment longer, watching his daughter's peaceful face in the dim glow of her nightlight. Claire would have been proud of her kindness, her curiosity, her resilience in the face of losing her mother so young. Back in the garage, Mark pulled Claire's journal from the corkboard. He'd read it so many times the pages were soft at the corners, but tonight he needed her guidance more than ever. The project was hitting another wall, and his savings were dwindling faster than he'd anticipated. He flipped to one of her last entries, traced her neat handwriting with his finger. The key isn't in mimicking vision exactly. It's about translation, creating a new language of perception. Sound can paint pictures in ways we've never imagined. Mark looked at the modified glasses in their vise, then at the complex circuit board he'd been assembling. Claire had been so close to a breakthrough when the cancer took her. Now, 3 years later, he was trying to complete her work, one soldered connection at a time. The digital clock on his workbench blinked 1:15 a.m. In less than 6 hours, he'd need to be at his maintenance job, unclogging drains and replacing ballasts in fluorescent fixtures. But for now, in the quiet of his garage, surrounded by Claire's notes and dreams, he picked up his screwdriver and returned to the delicate work before him. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, bills to pay, repairs to make, a daughter to raise. But tonight, in this small space filled with possibilities, Mark Chen continued his late wife's quest to help others see the world in a whole new way. Morning came too soon, announced by the harsh beep of Mark's alarm at 5:30 a.m. His eyes felt gritty from too little sleep, and his neck ached from hunching over the workbench. But there was no time for self-pity. The morning routine waited. For no one. "Emma, honey, time to get up," he called, gently shaking his daughter's shoulder. She stirred, burrowing deeper into her blankets. "Come on, kiddo. Mrs. Rodriguez is making breakfast for us today." At the mention of their neighbor's name, Emma's eyes fluttered open. "Pancakes?" "If we're lucky," Mark smiled, already moving, "to lay out her clothes. But only if we're ready in 20 minutes. Their elderly neighbor had taken them under her wing after Claire passed, often insisting on feeding them proper breakfasts when she knew Mark had worked late. Her small acts of kindness had become a lifeline during their hardest days. As Emma dressed, Mark checked her backpack, his heart sinking when he found the folded report card he'd forgotten about. The grades weren't terrible, but the teachers' comments told a familiar story. "Emma seems distracted in class, has difficulty focusing, shows great potential but needs more support at home." He tucked the report card into his pocket, adding it to the mental list of worries he carried. Between his 2 jobs and the late-night invention work, he knew Emma wasn't getting the attention she needed with her schoolwork. The guilt was a constant companion, as familiar as the coffee he was now gulping down. Mrs. Rodriguez's kitchen smelled of cinnamon and coffee when they arrived. The elderly woman took one look at Mark's tired face and clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "Otra vez trabajando tarde?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Working late again?" "Just a few more adjustments to make," Mark replied. Accepting the steaming mug she pressed into his hands, Emma was already settled at the small kitchen table, diving into a stack of pancakes shaped like hearts. "You cannot pour from an empty cup, Marcos," Mrs. Rodriguez said, using the Spanish version of his name that she insisted suited him better. "Your Claire would want you to rest, too." Mark nodded, not trusting himself to respond. Mrs. Rodriguez had known Claire, had watched their love story unfold from her kitchen window. She'd been there through the diagnosis, the treatments, the final days. She understood better than most why he couldn't let go of Claire's final project. The morning rushed by in its usual blur. Drop-off at Emma's school, where she hugged him, extra tight, sensing his worry about her grades. Then the drive to the office complex, where he managed maintenance, his mind already plotting out the day's repairs between computer service calls. By lunch, he'd fixed 3 blocked toilets, replaced 2 thermostats, and diagnosed a mysterious leak in the 3rd-floor ceiling. His phone buzzed with texts from clients hoping he could fit in their computer repairs. A frozen laptop, a virus-infected desktop, a tablet with a cracked screen. Each repair meant extra money, and every dollar counted. But each job also meant less time with Emma, less time for Claire's project, less time for everything that really mattered. The report card in his pocket seemed to grow heavier throughout the day. During a brief break, he called Emma's teacher to schedule a conference. "I know things have been difficult," Ms. Thompson said kindly, "but Emma's such a bright girl. She just needs more structure, more support with her homework, perhaps a tutor." Mark thanked her and ended the call, knowing a tutor was currently beyond their means. He stared at his reflection in the office window, greying at the temples. Now lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when Claire was alive. Sometimes it felt like he was failing at everything, being a father, bringing Claire's vision to life, keeping their heads above water. But then he remembered the small breakthroughs in the garage. Emma's resilient smile, Mrs. Rodriguez's unwavering support. They were making it day by day, even if it wasn't pretty or perfect. And maybe, just maybe, if he could get Claire's invention working, it would all be worth it. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows as he gathered his tools, preparing for the next repair. Somewhere between the morning's guilt and the evening's exhaustion, he held onto hope for Emma, for Claire's dream, for whatever tomorrow might bring. The address for the computer repair job led Mark to a small music studio on the quieter side of town. Wind chimes tinkled softly near the entrance, and the late afternoon sun caught the gold lettering on the window. Mitchell's Music, Piano and Theory Instruction. He heard the piano before he knocked. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, played with such feeling it made him pause, hands suspended in mid-air. The music spoke of longing, of memories just out of reach, of beauty tinged with sadness. When the final notes faded, he waited a moment before knocking. "Come in," called a warm voice. Sarah Mitchell sat at the piano, her fingers still resting lightly on the keys. She turned toward the sound of his footsteps, and Mark noticed how her unseeing eyes seemed to look just past him. "You must be the computer repair person." "Mark Chen," he said, suddenly aware of his work-stained clothes and rough hands. "You mentioned having trouble with your teaching software?" Sarah nodded, standing with practiced ease. "It's been reading the wrong octaves aloud, which makes it rather difficult to teach proper finger positioning." She moved confidently through her studio, one hand trailing along the furniture. "The computer's this way." On the wall behind her desk hung a framed concert program, yellowed with age. Sarah Mitchell, principal pianist, Beethoven's Emperor. "Concerto," Mark read aloud without thinking. "Ah, my last performance," Sarah said, a slight catch in her voice. 10 years ago now. The headaches had started by then, but none of us knew what they meant." She settled into her chair, hands folded. In her lap, "Would you like to hear the story while you work?" Mark opened his laptop bag, stealing glances at her serene face. "If you don't mind sharing." It was a progressive condition, intracranial pressure affecting the optic nerve. By the time they diagnosed it, the damage was irreversible. Her voice held no bitterness, only a quiet acceptance. "But music stayed with me, changed with me really. When you lose one way of experiencing the world, others become more profound." As Mark worked on her computer, Sarah spoke of learning to teach without sight, of hearing music in new ways, of finding purpose in helping others discover their own musical voices. "My students teach me as much as I teach them," she said, smiling. "Children especially. They don't see limitations, only possibilities." "My daughter's like that," Mark found himself saying. He told her about Emma, about Claire, about late nights in the garage trying to finish what his wife had started. The words came easily. Something about Sarah's presence inviting confidence. An interface that translates visual input into auditory. "Signals?" Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. "That's fascinating. How does it work?" Mark explained the basic concept, surprising himself with his enthusiasm. Claire's insight was that the brain is remarkably adaptable. If we can create a consistent language of sound that corresponds to visual patterns, the mind might learn to interpret it as a form of sight. "Like how I've learned to read a room through echoes and air currents," Sarah mused, "or how I can tell you're smiling right now from the way your voice lifts at the edges." Mark started, realizing she was right. He was smiling, the first genuine smile he'd worn all day. The software update finished running, and he tested it with a few musical phrases. "Try it now?" Sarah played a scale, nodding with satisfaction as the computer correctly announced each note. "Perfect. Though I have to admit, I'm more interested in your invention than my teaching software. Would you tell me more about it? Before Mark could respond, his phone buzzed. Emma's school. His heart sank as he answered, listening to the nurse describe a mild fever. Nothing serious, but could he please pick her up early? I have to go, he said apologetically. My daughter. Say no more. Sarah stood, finding her way to the door with fluid grace. But Mark, if you're ever looking for someone to test your device, I'd be honored. Claire's vision, the gift she wanted to give. It's beautiful. On the drive to Emma's school, Mark found himself thinking about Sarah's offer. Claire's journal was full of theoretical observations, but they'd never had a chance to test her ideas with someone who could provide real feedback. And there was something about Sarah's perspective, her way of understanding the world through sound. He glanced at the framed concert program she'd insisted he take with him, propped on the passenger seat. For inspiration, she'd said. Sometimes, the most beautiful music comes from learning to play in a new key. Emma was waiting in the nurse's office, pale but smiling when she saw him. As he gathered her into his arms, feeling her slight fever through his shirt, Mark made a decision. Tomorrow, he would call Sarah. Maybe, just maybe, she was the missing piece they'd been waiting for. The envelope was waiting when they got home, its official letterhead visible through the thin paper. Mark recognized the property management company's logo and felt his stomach clench. He tucked it into his back pocket before Emma could see, focusing instead on getting her settled with soup and children's Tylenol. I'm not that sick, Dad, she protested weakly, but her usual spark was dimmed by fever. You don't have to cancel your computer jobs. Family comes first, kiddo. Mark pressed a kiss to her forehead, checking her temperature. Besides, Mrs. Rodriguez already volunteered to look in on you while I make my last house call. It's an important one I can't reschedule. Once Emma was dozing on the couch, the elderly neighbor sitting vigilant with her knitting needles clicking softly, Mark retreated to the kitchen to read the letter. His hands shook slightly as he tore it open. Notice of rent increase and terms. Modification, the header read. The numbers below made his vision blur, a 40% increase effective in 60 days. Market adjustment, they called it. Below that, a reminder of his late payment last month and a warning about the building's policy on garage modifications. Someone had complained about his late-night activities. Mark sank into a kitchen chair, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The maintenance job's benefits barely covered their health insurance. Computer repairs brought in extra cash, but not enough. And now this, his phone buzzed, a text from his supervisor at the office complex. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Departmental restructuring. Attendance mandatory. The words restructuring and mandatory sent a chill through him. He'd seen this before, watched other maintenance workers cleared out for cheaper contracted services. His hands clenched around the phone, mind racing through calculations. Their savings wouldn't cover 2 months of the new rent, let alone a move. And with Emma's recent medical bills... Marcos? Mrs. Rodriguez stood in the doorway, concern etched on her weathered face. She glanced at the letter he was clutching, understanding dawning in her eyes. Ah! They sent them to everyone in the building, mijijo. Perhaps it's time to consider... I can't move back in with my parents, Mark said quietly, voicing the suggestion she'd made before. They're already stretched thin caring for my sister's kids, and Emma's school is here. Her friends, her routine. Mrs. Rodriguez sat across from him, her dark eyes gentle but firm. Then what is your plan? Those glasses you're building. Claire's project. How close are you? Mark ran a hand through his graying hair. The basic system works. I've got the visual processing unit translating simple patterns into sound frequencies, but the neural network needs training, refinement, and the components I need, he trailed off, thinking of the specialized parts sitting in his online shopping cart, their total more than a month's rent. The music teacher you mentioned, Mrs. Rodriguez said thoughtfully, the one who offered to help test it. Sarah. Mark straightened slightly. Yes, she... She understands exactly what we're trying to achieve, but I can't ask her to test an unfinished prototype. If something went wrong... Did Claire ever tell you how I lost my Pedro? Mrs. Rodriguez asked suddenly. Mark shook his head. He knew her husband had passed before they moved to the building, but she rarely spoke of him. He was an inventor too, always tinkering with things in our garage. He had this idea for a better wheelchair, one that could climb stairs. Everyone said he was loco, that he should stick to his mechanic's job. She smiled at the memory, but he found someone willing to test it, a young mother with a disabled child. They worked together for months improving it. The chair never made it to market, but that woman's daughter went to college because of it. Sometimes, mijijo, we need to trust others to help us carry our dreams. From the living room came the sound of Emma coughing. Mark stood to check on her, but Mrs. Rodriguez waved him back down. Go to your meeting with the music teacher. I'll watch our Nina. Some fevers need medicine, but some dreams need courage. That evening, after ensuring Emma was comfortable and her fever was dropping, Mark called Sarah's studio. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for his call. I was hoping I'd hear from you, she said warmly. I've been thinking about your project all afternoon. Mark found himself explaining everything. The rent increase, the threatening job situation, the components he needed but couldn't afford. I know the prototype isn't ready, he finished, but if you're still willing to help test it, when would you like to start? Sarah's response was immediate, confident. I have a break between students tomorrow afternoon. The basic system only processes simple shapes right now, Mark warned, and the sound mapping is crude. Mark, Sarah interrupted gently, do you know what I miss most about seeing? Not the grand vistas or spectacular sunsets. I miss the simple things, reading my students' expressions, knowing when someone's had a hard day, seeing a child's face light up when they master a difficult piece. Start with those. Start with what matters. After they hung up, Mark went to the garage. Claire's journal lay open on his workbench, and next to it, Sarah's old concert program caught the light. Two women who'd never meet, yet somehow their paths were intertwined with his, guiding him forward. He picked up his tools and began to work, not on the complex neural networks or advanced processing algorithms, but on the basic interface, the part that would let Sarah experience the simple joy of knowing when her student was smiling. The notice of rent increase sat in his pocket like a weight, and tomorrow's meeting loomed like a shadow. But for the first time in weeks, the weight felt bearable, the shadow less dark. He had 60 days to figure something out, 60 days to either make Claire's dream work or find another way forward. In the house, he could hear Mrs. Rodriguez singing softly to Emma, an old Spanish lullaby about stars guiding lost travelers home. Mark bent over his workbench, soldering iron in hand, and added his own quiet prayer to the night, for time, for guidance, for the courage to trust not just in himself, but in others who might help light the way forward. The department meeting went exactly as Mark had feared. Outsourcing, efficiency, transition period, corporate euphemisms that meant half the maintenance staff would be gone within 3 months. He'd been offered a chance to stay on at reduced hours, a small mercy that felt more like a slow execution than a reprieve. But now, watching Sarah Mitchell run her fingers over the prototype glasses, those worries temporarily receded. They were in her studio during her afternoon break, the late autumn sun casting long shadows through the windows. The camera is here, Mark explained, guiding her hand to the tiny lens embedded in the frame. It captures shapes and basic patterns, converting them into different sound frequencies. Higher pitches for brighter areas, lower for darker ones. Sarah nodded, her expression focused, like reading a musical landscape. She carefully placed the glasses on, their clunky form a far cry from the sleek design in Claire's sketches. A mess of wires connected them to a small processing unit that Mark had cobbled together from salvaged parts. Ready? He asked, holding up a simple geometric shape cut from white paper. Sarah tilted her head, listening to the audio feed. There's, something, a high tone, but it's unstable. moving. That's the square I'm holding, Mark confirmed, trying to keep the excitement from his voice. The fluctuation is probably from my hand shaking. Here, let me... He mounted the paper on a stand, eliminating the human variable. Sarah's face concentrated, then slowly broke into a smile. It's clearer now. A steady tone. Rectangular. Square, Mark corrected gently. But you're perceiving the basic shape. That's incredible, Sarah. Emma, who had insisted on coming along after school, bounced in her chair. Try the circle, Dad. Show her the circle. But when Mark switched shapes, Sarah winced. The frequency shift is too jarring. It needs smoother transitions between tones, like legato instead of staccato. They worked for an hour, Mark taking notes in Claire's journal, Emma helping to organize the test shapes, Sarah providing detailed feedback about the sound landscape she was experiencing. A box of failed prototypes sat at their feet. Earlier, versions with different camera configurations, various audio processing attempts, multiple interface designs. The basic concept is sound, Sarah said as they wrapped up, carefully removing the glasses, but it needs refinement. The human brain is remarkably adaptable, but it needs consistency to learn new patterns. Like practicing scales, Emma chimed, importantly, proud to make the connection to her own piano lessons. Sarah smiled in her direction. Exactly like that. We need to establish a clear, consistent language of sound that the brain can learn to interpret. She reached for the glasses again, her fingers tracing the rough edges of Mark's handiwork. How are you processing the visual data? Mark explained his basic algorithm, aware of its limitations. Claire's notes suggest using a neural network for more complex pattern recognition, but the computing power required... What if, Sarah began thoughtfully, instead of trying to process everything at once, we started with face recognition? Simple emotional markers, smiles, frowns. That's what you mentioned wanting to start with, right? Before Mark could respond, Emma's stomach growled loudly. Sarah laughed. I believe that's our cue to take a break. I was going to order some Chinese food for dinner. Would you two like to join me? Mark hesitated, conscious of both his tight budget and the work waiting at home. But Emma was already saying yes, and there was something about Sarah's studio, its warm acoustics, the gentle tick of her metronome, the lingering notes from her students' lessons, that made him want to stay. Over dinner, Sarah told stories about her students while Emma practiced using chopsticks. Mark found himself relaxing, sharing amusing tales from his repair jobs. The prototype glasses sat on Sarah's desk, temporarily forgotten, but full of promise. Later, driving home with a sleepy Emma in the back seat, Mark realized something had shifted. The box of failed prototypes didn't feel like a record of defeat anymore, but rather stepping stones towards success. Each attempt, each error, was teaching them something new. Dad, Emma murmured from the back, I like Miss Sarah. She laughs, like Mom used to. Mark gripped the steering wheel tighter, surprised by the observation and the complex emotions it stirred. Yeah, he said softly, I guess she does. The transformation in Emma's science project was remarkable. Where once her assignments had been hastily completed between Mark's jobs and her own exhaustion, now her poster board stood proudly in their living room, covered in careful diagrams of sound waves and visual processing. And this part, she explained to Mrs. Rodriguez, pointing to a drawing of what looked like squiggly lines, shows how different shapes make different sounds, like how a circle sounds smooth, but a triangle has pointy notes. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded seriously, though Mark suspected she didn't fully understand the technical aspects. What she did understand, what was clear to everyone, was the change in Emma herself. Her latest progress report sat on the refrigerator, a bright B+ in science where C's had previously lived. Ms. Thompson says I can present it at the science fair next month, Emma continued, practically bouncing. Dad, can Miss Sarah come? She helped me understand the sound parts better than anyone. Mark looked up from where he was soldering a new component into the latest prototype. We'll ask her at tomorrow's testing session, okay? The prototype was evolving, growing more sophisticated with each iteration. Sarah's feedback had been invaluable, helping them refine the sound mapping system into something more intuitive. They discovered that musical training gave her a unique advantage in distinguishing subtle variations in tone. It's like learning a new instrument, she'd explained during their last session. Each shape has its own voice, its own signature. The brain just needs time to learn the melody. The next breakthrough came unexpectedly during one of Emma's piano lessons with Sarah. Mark had been adjusting the prototype sensitivity when Emma started playing a simple Bach minuet. The glass's audio processing picked up the movement of her hands across the keys, translating it into a visual symphony that made Sarah gasp. "I can see the music," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "Not just hear it, actually see it flowing like light on water." That evening, Mark added a new entry to Claire's journal, his handwriting mixing with hers on the well-worn pages. Visual auditory synthesis, successful in processing dynamic movement, potential applications beyond basic shape recognition. Claire, I wish you could see how your theory is coming to life. The financial pressure hadn't eased. If anything, it had grown worse. The reduced hours at his maintenance job meant more computer repair work in the evenings. But now he had help. Sarah offered her studio for testing sessions, providing a quiet, controlled environment that was far better than his cluttered garage. Mrs. Rodriguez continued her support, feeding them and watching Emma when needed. Even Emma's teacher had noticed the change. "Whatever you're doing differently," Ms. Thompson said during a brief parent-teacher conference, "keep doing it. Emma's focus has improved dramatically. She's connecting concepts in ways I haven't seen before." Mark didn't mention that his daughter was now spending her evenings helping calibrate visual processing algorithms and discussing sound wave patterns with a blind concert pianist. Some things were hard to explain to those who hadn't witnessed. The journey, the prototype still had limitations. Complex scenes overwhelmed the processing unit, creating a cacophony of conflicting sounds. Battery life was measured in minutes, not hours. The wiring was exposed, the components delicate and prone to failure. But there were moments, precious, breathtaking moments, when everything worked exactly as Claire had envisioned. Like when Sarah correctly identified Emma's smile through the audio feedback, or when she navigated the studio without her cane, guided only by the glass's translation of spatial relationships into sound. Small victories, Sarah reminded him when he grew frustrated with the device's limitations. That's how we learn any new language, one word at a time, one shape at a time, one smile at a time. Emma had adopted this philosophy in her own way. Her science project now included a section titled Problems and Solutions, where she carefully documented each challenge they encountered and how they worked to overcome it. It was precisely the kind of methodical approach Claire would have loved. In quiet moments, Mark sometimes found himself watching Emma work on her project, her face set in that familiar expression of concentration that was so like her mother's. The glasses might have begun as Claire's dream, but they had become something more, a bridge between past and future, between sight and sound, between loss and hope. And somehow, in ways Mark couldn't have predicted, they were helping his daughter find her own path forward. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m, as breakthroughs often do. Mark had been staring at Claire's algorithm notes for hours, his eyes burning from fatigue, when suddenly the pattern emerged. It wasn't just about translating visual data into sound. It was about creating a language the brain could instinctively understand. "Sound signatures," he muttered, flipping frantically through Claire's journal. "Not just frequencies, but patterns, emotional patterns." His fingers flew across the keyboard, modifying the code that had been giving them so much trouble. The original algorithm treated each visual input as a discrete element to be translated, but Claire's notes suggested something different. a holistic approach that mimicked how the brain naturally processes facial expressions. A smile wasn't just a curved line. It was a constellation of subtle changes that created an emotional signature. When his phone rang at 7, he hadn't slept at all. Sarah's voice carried a hint of concern. "Mark, Emma said you weren't answering your texts. Are you all right? I need you to come to the garage," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and excitement. I think I've got it." An hour later, Sarah sat in his garage, the newest version of the glasses perched on her nose. The exposed wires were the same, the components still jury-rigged, but the software running through them was completely different. "Ready?" Mark asked, positioning himself in front of her. Emma watched from her perch on the workbench, barely containing her excitement. "Do it, Dad," she whispered. "Show her your smile." Mark smiled, feeling somewhat self-conscious. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh," she breathed. That's not just shapes. It's warmth, like sunshine breaking through clouds." Her voice trembled slightly. "I can feel the emotion in the sound." "Try another one," Emma urged. "Do a sad face." Mark complied, and Sarah's expression shifted in response. "Now it's minor chords, deeper tones, melancholy, but still you. There's a signature to it, like how I can recognize a Chopin piece from the first few notes." They spent the morning testing different expressions, different emotions. The glasses weren't just translating visual data anymore. They were creating an emotional landscape of sound that Sarah's brain could interpret naturally, almost instinctively. "It's like," Sarah searched for words, "like when you hear someone laugh in another room. Before you see them, you already know who it is, how they're feeling." The glasses are doing that with visual information. Emma's contribution proved unexpectedly valuable. "Like in music," she said, "when you can tell if a song is happy or sad just from how it sounds, even if you don't know the words." "Exactly." Sarah beamed in her direction. "Your dad created a visual symphony, with each expression its own unique melody." Mark watched them, fighting back exhaustion. The code running on his laptop was a maze of complexity, building on Claire's foundational insights in ways he hadn't thought possible. It was as if she had left him a map, and he had finally learned to read it correctly. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Emma, would you get that photo from my desk? The one in the silver frame." Emma knew which one he meant. The last family photo taken before Claire got sick. She brought it reverently, placing it in Mark's hands. "Sarah," he said softly, "I'd like you to see someone." He held up the photograph. For a moment there was silence in the garage. Then Sarah's breath caught. "3 people," she said slowly. "A man, you, but younger, a small child, Emma, and..." She reached out, her fingers hovering near the image. "A woman. The sound signature. It's in your code, isn't it? The way you wrote the emotional mapping." Mark nodded, forgetting she couldn't see the gesture. "Claire," he managed. "That's Claire." Sarah carefully removed the glasses, wiping at her eyes. "You didn't just write code, Mark. You captured something of her in it, the way she saw the world, the way she wanted to help others see it." Emma moved to sit beside Sarah, leaning against her in a way that had become natural over their weeks together. "Dad says Mom could find the good in everything, like you do with music." The morning sun streamed through the garage windows, catching the dust motes in its beam. Mark looked at the 3 of them, his daughter, the woman who was helping bring Claire's vision to life, and the photograph that bridged past and present. The glasses sat between them, no longer just a prototype, but a promise being fulfilled. "We should document this version of the code," Sarah said finally, her professional calm returning, though her voice still held a trace of emotion. "For the patent application," Mark started. In all the excitement of development, he hadn't thought that far ahead. "Patent?" Sarah smiled, turning toward his voice with uncanny accuracy. Claire's dream wasn't just to help one person see differently. It was to help everyone see in new ways. Isn't it time to share that vision with the world? The stack of medical bills on Mark's desk grew taller each day, their red past due stamps a stark contrast to the white paper. Emma's persistent headaches had grown worse, and the pediatrician's concerned frown during their last visit had sent them down a rabbit hole of specialists and tests. "Just to be thorough," the doctor had said, but Mark recognized the careful tone, the same one used when Claire first became ill. Now, watching Emma squint at her science project notes, he felt the familiar clutch of fear in his chest. "The letters are all blurry again, Dad," she said, rubbing her eyes, "and my head feels funny." Mark set down the prototype he'd been adjusting. "Maybe we should take a break from all this. The science fair isn't for another 2 weeks. "No." Emma's protest was immediate. "Ms. Sarah is coming to help me practice my presentation tomorrow. I need to be ready." Sarah had become a constant presence in their lives, her studio a second home for Emma's after-school hours. She approached Emma's science project with the same patience she showed her piano students, helping her understand complex concepts through musical analogies. But today, Emma's usual enthusiasm was dampened by pain. Mark watched her press her fingers against her temples, a gesture so reminiscent of Claire that it made his heart stop. The neurologist's office had called that morning. The MRI results were in, and they wanted to discuss them in person. The appointment would cost another $250 copay they couldn't afford. But what choice did he have? "Mi hijo," Mrs. Rodriguez's voice came from the doorway. She held a steaming mug of her special tea, the one she claimed could cure anything from heartache to headaches. "The little one needs rest. And so do you." Mark hadn't told her about the medical bills or the MRI, but little escaped her notice. She'd been bringing more food lately, insisting on watching Emma during his repair jobs, refusing any payment with a stern look that brooked no argument. "The prototype is almost ready for full testing," he said, more to himself than to her. "If we can get the patent application filed, maybe." "And how much does a patent cost?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked gently. Mark closed his eyes. The patent attorney he'd contacted had quoted figures that made his reduced maintenance salary seem like pocket change. Even with his savings and the income from repair jobs, they were barely keeping up with rent and Emma's medical bills. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Emma left her music book at the studio. I can bring it by this evening if you're working." On the prototype. The prototype. It sat on his workbench, tantalizingly close to completion. Claire's dream, transformed through Sarah's insights and Emma's innocent wisdom into something remarkable. But dreams, he was learning again, had to sometimes yield to harsher realities. "I think I found Mom's old music book." Emma called from her room, then made a small sound of pain. "Dad, why is everything so sparkly?" Mark was moving before she finished speaking, recognizing the symptoms that had preceded Claire's worst headaches. He reached Emma just as her knees buckled. "I don't feel good," she whispered, and then she was in his arms, pale and trembling. The next hours passed in a blur of emergency room fluorescent lights and medical terminology. Emma's doctor was called in, scans were ordered, more. Bills accumulated. Mark sat in the hard hospital chair, holding his daughter's small hand, while Mrs. Rodriguez handled the paperwork with quiet efficiency. Sarah arrived despite the late hour, her cane tapping a path to Emma's bedside. She carried not only the forgotten music book, but also her tablet with recorded piano pieces, soft, soothing melodies that filled the sterile room with warmth. "The glasses project," Emma murmured during a brief moment of wakefulness. "Don't give up on it, Dad. Mom wouldn't want you to." Mark squeezed her hand, unable to speak. On the bedside table, his phone showed a missed call from the patent attorney and another from his supervisor, probably about missing his shift for the emergency. The prototype sat neglected in his garage, while here in this hospital room, history threatened to repeat itself in the most terrifying way. "One step at a time," Sarah said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "Right now, Emma needs you. The rest we'll figure out together." Together, the word hung in the air, a promise and a lifeline. Mark looked at the small circle of support gathered in the room. Mrs. Rodriguez, with her quiet strength, Sarah with her unwavering presence, and Emma, his brave, brilliant Emma, finally sleeping peacefully under the influence of medication. Together, perhaps, they could face whatever came next. The community center's bulletin board held an unusual flyer. Musical fundraiser for Emma Chen. Help a young inventor see her dream. Sarah's students had created it, decorating the borders with musical notes and drawings of glasses. Mark stared at it, throat tight with emotion. It was the children's idea, Sarah explained, standing beside him in her studio. When I told them Emma couldn't come to her lessons because of medical tests, they insisted on helping. They love her, you know. She has a way of making complex things seem magical. Mark touched the flyer gently. Sarah, I can't accept. You can and you will, she interrupted firmly. Your neighbors are organizing a potluck, my students are performing, and Mrs. Rodriguez has somehow convinced half the building to contribute. Accept the help, Mark. Sometimes strength lies in letting others share your burden. The diagnosis had come that morning. Intracranial pressure, similar to what had taken Claire's sight. But caught early, the doctor said. Treatable with proper care. The treatment plan sat in Mark's pocket, its estimated costs making his head spin. Besides, Sarah continued, a smile playing at her lips, this isn't charity. It's an investment in innovation. The prototype got Emma interested in science, didn't it? Her project explains the technology so beautifully that my students finally understood why their teacher keeps talking about seeing music. The science fair project stood in the corner of Sarah's studio, where Emma had been perfecting her presentation before the headaches began. Now it served as a symbol of hope, proof that Claire's dream lived on through their daughter. The fundraiser took shape with surprising speed. Mrs. Rodriguez's network of church friends mobilized, cooking enough food to feed an army. Sarah's current and former students signed up to perform. Even Mark's maintenance colleagues, facing their own job uncertainties, contributed what they could. But the real surprise came from an unexpected quarter. Ms. Thompson, Emma's teacher, arrived at the studio one afternoon with news that left Mark speechless. The school board read Emma's project proposal, she explained, excitement coloring her voice. They're interested in the potential applications for visually impaired students. They want to discuss a pilot program, pending patent approval. Of course, Mark sank into a chair, but the patent, the legal fees, are being handled, Sarah said quietly. She reached for a folder on her desk, holding it out to him. I hope you'll forgive me for taking liberties, but I sent Claire's original research notes to my brother. He's a patent attorney in Boston. Sarah, no, he's doing it pro bono, she continued, speaking over his protest. Says it's the most innovative accessibility technology he's seen in years. He's already started the paperwork. Mark opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside lay preliminary patent applications, professional technical drawings based on his rough sketches, and a letter of intent from an educational technology firm. People believe in this, Mark, Sarah said softly. They believe in what Claire started, what you've continued, what Emma's helped create. Let them help make it real. The day of the fundraiser dawned clear and crisp. The community center's main room was transformed, strings of lights twinkling above round tables. Emma, released from the hospital but still moving carefully, sat in a place of honor, while Sarah's students performed pieces they'd chosen especially for her. Mrs. Rodriguez had outdone herself, coordinating a feast that filled 3 long tables. Mark noticed she'd made all of Emma's favorites, including Claire's secret recipe cookies that somehow tasted exactly right. Between musical numbers, Emma's science project video played on a screen, her clear young voice explaining how the glasses translated visual information into sound. The prototype itself sat on display, drawing curious questions from attendees. Mark found himself explaining the technology again and again, each time seeing new possibilities through others' eyes. Your wife would be proud, Mrs. Rodriguez said. Appearing at his elbow with a plate of food, she insisted he eat, not just of the invention, but of how you've let love guide its creation. Mark watched Emma, pale but smiling, as she listened to a young piano student play. Sarah sat beside her, their heads tilted together as they watched the performance through shared understanding. Around them, the community that had become their extended family celebrated not just the fundraiser's success, but the power of collective hope. The medical bills wouldn't vanish, and challenges lay ahead. But here, in this room full of music and light and love, Mark finally understood what Sarah had meant about strength. It wasn't just about carrying on Claire's work, it was about letting that work transform and grow through the connections it created, the lives it touched, the community it built. Sometimes the greatest innovations aren't just the ones we create, but the ones that create us. The final prototype looked deceptively simple. Sleek black frames housing a complex network of miniaturized components. Gone were the exposed wires and bulky processing unit of earlier versions. In their place, Sarah held what appeared to be ordinary glasses, their only unusual feature being the slight thickness of the temples where the processing cores lived. "It's lighter," she remarked, running her fingers along the frame, "and warmer somehow. More human." Mark nodded, then caught himself. "The casing is a special polymer that conducts heat away from the processors. It should be more comfortable for extended wear." He didn't mention the cost of the materials or the hours he'd spent teaching himself industrial design software to create the housing. The fundraiser had provided enough for Emma's immediate medical needs, with just enough left over for this final version. Emma sat cross-legged on Sarah's piano bench, her color better after weeks of treatment. "The doctors say the pressure is stabilizing," she announced proudly, "and I haven't had a bad headache in 3 days." The words sent a wave of relief through Mark, though he knew they weren't out of the woods yet. Emma's condition would require ongoing monitoring, but the early intervention had made all the difference. Unlike with Claire, they'd caught it in time. "Ready to test the new calibration?" he asked Sarah, trying to keep his voice steady. This was the moment of truth. Either the streamlined processing cores would handle the enhanced emotional mapping algorithm, or months of work would need revision. Sarah settled the glasses on her face, their form finally matching the elegance of Claire's original design sketches. The startup sequence was silent now, no more clicks or whirs, just a subtle warming of the frames to indicate activation. "Emma," Mark said softly, "would you play something for us? That new piece you've been practicing." Emma's fingers found the keys, and the opening notes of Beethoven's Fur-Elise filled the studio. They'd chosen this piece specifically. Its emotional dynamics would test the glass's ability to process both movement and expression simultaneously. Sarah's breath caught. Her hands rose slightly, conducting an invisible orchestra of visual information translated into sound. "I can see the music flowing from her hands," she whispered. "But more than that, I can see her joy in playing it, the way her expression changes with each phrase." Mark watched the glasses process the complex input, monitoring the diagnostic. Read out on his tablet. The neural networks were handling the load, translating visual data into Sarah's unique sound language without lag or distortion. "Try moving around the room," he suggested. Sarah stood, her movements confident as she navigated the familiar space. The glasses mapped depth and distance into subtle audio cues, allowing her to sense obstacles and openings naturally. "It's like having another sense entirely," she said, wonder in her voice. "Not sight exactly, but something new, something—" She searched for the word whole. Emma finished her piece with a small flourish. "Did you see me smile at the end, when I finally got the tricky part right?" "I did," Sarah beamed. "It sounded like sunshine breaking through clouds. Your father's emotional mapping is quite poetic." Mark felt his ears warm. The sound signatures for different expressions had become increasingly refined through their testing, influenced by both Sarah's musical understanding and Emma's intuitive descriptions. The result was something that transcended simple visual to audio translation. "The patent attorney thinks we can file next week," he said, checking another diagnostic reading. "The school board is already talking about a pilot program for their vision-impaired students, and there's interest from several assistive technology companies. And the best part," Emma added excitedly, "is that I can demonstrate it at the science fair. Ms. Thompson says I might even qualify for the state competition." Sarah removed the glasses carefully, holding them with the reverence usually reserved for fine instruments. "Claire's dream was to help people see the world in new ways," she said quietly, "but I don't think even she could have imagined how many lives this might touch." Mark thought of his wife's journal, its pages now supplemented with his notes, and Emma's observations and Sarah's insights. What had started as one woman's vision had grown into something larger through the contributions of an entire community. "There's just one thing left to do," Sarah continued, a slight smile playing at her lips. "These glasses need a name, something that honors their origin while looking toward their future." Emma perked up. "I've been thinking about that." "What?" "About symphony sight, because they turn the world into music." Mark and Sarah both turned toward her voice, matching expressions of surprise and delight on their faces. In that moment, Mark saw what Claire might have seen. Not just an invention, but a bridge between worlds, a harmony of sight and sound, of past and future, of loss and hope. "Symphony sight," he repeated softly. "It's perfect." The morning of Emma's science fair presentation dawned bright and clear. Symphony Sight sat in its velvet-lined case, ready for its public debut. Mark had spent hours polishing the frames until they gleamed, while Emma practiced her presentation. With Sarah, each word carefully chosen to explain the technology in terms her classmates could understand. "Remember," Sarah advised, adjusting Emma's collar, "tell them the story first. Help them understand why it matters before you show them how it works." They had arranged for Sarah to demonstrate the glasses as part of Emma's presentation. The school had even invited several representatives from the district's accessibility department to attend. Everything was prepared, rehearsed, perfect. But when Emma stood up from the piano bench after her final practice run, something in her movement caught Sarah's attention through the glasses. The sound signature was off. "Emma, sweetheart, could you walk across the room again?" Sarah asked, keeping her voice casual. Mark looked up from where he was reviewing the presentation notes. "Everything okay? Just checking something," Sarah said, her head tilted slightly as she processed the audio input. "Emma, one more time, please, but this time close your eyes while you walk." Emma complied, giggling as she made her way across the studio with her eyes shut. But Sarah wasn't smiling anymore. The glasses were translating something in Emma's gait, a subtle asymmetry that created a dissonance in the usual harmonious pattern of movement. "Mark," Sarah said carefully, "has Emma had her eyes tested recently? Not just the standard charts, but a full neurological vision exam." "They did some tests at the hospital," Mark replied, a note of concern creeping into his voice. "With all the pressure issues, why? What are you seeing?" Sarah stood, moving closer to Emma, who had opened her eyes and was watching them curiously. The glasses mapped movement into specific sound patterns. "I've learned to recognize the signatures of different gaits, postures, compensatory movements." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Emma's walking pattern suggests she's compensating for something. Specifically, her spatial perception seems slightly altered on her left side." Mark felt his heart stutter. "What exactly are you saying?" "The glasses are picking up subtle adjustments in her movement, the kind people make unconsciously when their visual field is compromised. It's similar to patterns I've observed in my students with partial visual field defects." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. I think there might be more going on with her vision than the pressure headaches alone would suggest. Emma had gone quiet. Her earlier excitement dimmed. Sometimes the music notes do look fuzzy on one side, she admitted in a small voice. I thought it was just because I was tired. Mark was already reaching for his phone, pulling up the number for Emma's. Neurologist, but his hands were shaking too badly to dial. Here, Sarah said softly, taking the phone. Let me. She quickly explained what she had observed through the glasses, using precise technical terms that spoke of long experience with medical professionals. The neurologist's office promised to fit Emma in that afternoon. But the science fair, Emma protested, tears welling in her eyes. All that work will still be there, Mark assured her, pulling her close. This is more important. Sarah removed Symphony Sight carefully, placing it in its case. You know, she said thoughtfully, there's something poetic about this. Claire created these glasses to help people see the world differently. Now they're helping us see something we might have missed otherwise. The afternoon dissolved into a blur of medical terminology and tests. The neurologist listened intently to Sarah's observations, noting how the glasses had mapped Emma's subtle compensatory movements. Additional scans were ordered, more detailed than before, focusing specifically on the areas controlling visual processing. It's not the intracranial pressure itself, the doctor explained finally, pointing to shadows on the scan. There's a small vascular malformation affecting her left visual field. It's been developing slowly, which is why she's been unconsciously adapting. The pressure symptoms actually helped us catch this earlier than we might have otherwise. Mark gripped Emma's hand, his mind racing. Can it be treated? The doctor nodded, already sketching out treatment options. The location is favorable for microsurgery, and because we've caught it early, before any significant vision loss has occurred, the prognosis is excellent. But, she added, fixing them with a serious look, we need to move quickly. Throughout the consultation, Sarah sat quietly in the corner, Symphony Sight cradled in her lap. The glasses that had begun as Claire's dream of helping the blind see had somehow evolved into something more. A tool that could detect subtle patterns even sighted people might miss. Dad? Emma's voice was small but steady. Can we still show the glasses at school? Not today, obviously, but maybe after? Because now they're even more special. They helped me just like they helped Miss Sarah. Mark looked at his daughter, seeing Claire's determination in her face. Of course we can, sweetheart. And you know what? I think we need to add this to your presentation. Because this is exactly what Mom believed, that technology should help us understand each other. Better, see things we might otherwise miss. Sarah smiled, her fingers tracing the frames of Symphony Sight. Your mother's vision keeps growing, she said softly. First helping the blind to see, now helping doctors understand their patients better. Who knows what else these glasses might reveal? The drive home was quiet, each of them processing the day's dramatic turn. But as they pulled into their parking spot, Mrs. Rodriguez was waiting with her usual impeccable timing and a container of still warm comfort food. I called her from the hospital, Sarah admitted. I hope you don't mind. Mark looked at the small group gathered around him, his daughter, so brave in the face of uncertainty. Sarah, whose insights had quite possibly saved Emma's vision. Mrs. Rodriguez, already organizing the practical details of post-surgery care. Claire would have loved this, he thought. Not just the technology itself, but the way it had brought people together, the way it had grown beyond its original purpose. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep with Mrs. Rodriguez keeping watch, Mark and Sarah sat in his garage workshop. Symphony Sight lay between them on the workbench, its elegant frames reflecting the overhead light. We'll need to document this, Sarah said finally. Add medical detection capabilities to the patent application. Your brother's going to be very interested, she added with a small smile. Mark nodded, pulling out Claire's journal. On its pages, their three handwritings mingled: Claire's original vision, his technical notes, and Sarah's musical insights. About sound signatures. Now they would add another chapter to its story. Claire used to say that the best inventions are the ones that surprise us, he said quietly, that grow beyond what we initially imagined. Sarah reached across the workbench, finding his hand with unerring accuracy. She was right, and she'd be so proud of how you've carried her dream forward. She squeezed his fingers gently. How you've let it grow into something that helped save your daughter's sight. Outside, the night was quiet except for the gentle chiming of Mrs. Rodriguez's wind chimes. Their sound reminded Mark of Symphony Sight's audio translations, complex patterns carrying messages for those who knew how to listen. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: surgery preparations, insurance forms, rescheduling Emma's presentation. But tonight, in this garage where it had all begun, Mark finally felt the full circle of Claire's vision coming complete. She had wanted to help people see the world differently, and in doing so, had given them all a new way of seeing each other. Time seemed to accelerate after the diagnosis. The neurosurgeon wanted to operate within 2 weeks, setting off a frantic race to prepare. Insurance forms needed filing, medical leave papers required signatures, and through it all, Emma's condition needed constant monitoring. "Any changes in vision, even small ones, you call me immediately," Dr. Wallace had insisted, pressing her card into Mark's hand. The vascular malformation was stable for now, but its position meant things could change quickly. Mark sat at his kitchen table surrounded by papers, surgical consent forms, hospital pre-registration documents, and a calendar marked with an impossible number of pre-op appointments. The estimated costs made his head swim, even with insurance. "Stop staring at those numbers," Sarah said firmly, setting a cup of coffee beside him. She'd taken to coming over in the evenings, helping organize the medical maze while Mrs. Rodriguez kept Emma occupied with cooking lessons. "The fundraiser money won't cover all of this," Mark said quietly, not wanting Emma to overhear from the kitchen where she was learning to make empanadas. Sarah's hand found his shoulder unerringly. "Check your email. My brother sent something an hour ago." Mark opened his laptop, finding a message from Sarah's patent attorney brother. His eyes widened as he read. A medical technology company had seen the preliminary patent application for Symphony Sight, particularly its potential diagnostic applications. They wanted to fast-track development with a significant advance against future royalties. "This isn't charity," Sarah said, anticipating his protest. "They see the value in what we've created. What Claire started, what you developed, what Emma helped refine. It's going to help a lot of people. Let it help her first." The advance would cover the surgery and post-operative care, with enough left over to secure their housing situation. Mark felt tears threatening and blinked them back. A small commotion from the kitchen drew their attention. "Dad, Mrs. Rodriguez says I'm a natural at crimping empanada edges. Come see." They found Emma at the counter, flour dusting her cheeks, carefully sealing the edges of half-moon pastries, while Mrs. Rodriguez beamed proudly. For a moment, the scene was so normal, so precious, that Mark's throat tightened. "Mi Angelita," Mrs. Rodriguez said softly. "Teaching you my special recipes gives me an excuse to make sure you have proper food after your surgery. Your father would feed you nothing but takeout." Emma giggled, then squinted slightly, her right hand rising unconsciously to her temple. Mark tensed, but Sarah was already moving, Symphony Sight in her hands. "May I?" she asked Emma, who nodded. Sarah put on the glasses, studying Emma's movements as she returned to her cooking. "The compensation pattern is stable," she reported after a few minutes. "No deterioration." They'd been using the glasses to monitor Emma's subtle adjustments to her changing vision, creating a baseline for her surgical team. Dr. Wallace had been fascinated by the technology, spending hours reviewing the documented patterns with Sarah. "It's like having a continuous visual field test," she'd marveled, "but one that catches micro-adjustments we might otherwise miss." The hospital had already requested to document the case, seeing potential applications for post-operative monitoring. In similar cases, Claire's vision of helping people see differently was expanding in ways none of them had imagined. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Mark found Sarah in his garage workshop. She was running her fingers over Claire's journal, her touch reverent. "Emma asked me something interesting today," she said as he sat beside her. She wanted to know if after her surgery she could help teach other kids to use Symphony Sight. She said she understands now what it's like to see the world differently. Mark smiled, remembering Emma's determination to reschedule her science fair presentation for after her recovery. Claire would have loved that. She always said understanding comes from experience. Sarah nodded, her fingers finding a particular page in the journal. This passage here, about creating bridges between different ways of seeing. She wasn't just talking about technology, was she? No, Mark agreed softly. She believed that helping people see differently meant helping them understand each other better. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sound of Mrs. Rodriguez humming in the kitchen as she packed away the day's baking. In just over a week, they would face the surgery that could save Emma's vision. But somehow, the fear felt manageable now, held at bay by the network of support that had grown around them. Symphony Sight sat in its case nearby, its presence a reminder that sometimes the best innovations come from necessity, from love, from the desire to help others see what we see. And sometimes, Mark realized, they help us see what we've had all along. The breakthrough came during one of Emma's pre-surgical consultations. Sarah had been documenting Emma's visual compensation patterns with Symphony Sight when she noticed something unusual in the sound signatures. "It's like there's a rhythm to it," she explained to Dr. Wallace, her fingers moving as if conducting an invisible orchestra. The way Emma adjusts her positioning changes depending on what she's focusing on, almost like her brain is creating workarounds. The neurosurgeon leaned forward, intrigued. "Can you elaborate?" Sarah removed the glasses and placed them carefully on the desk. "When she's reading music, the compensation pattern is different from when she's reading text. And when she's playing piano, there's another pattern entirely. Her brain is adapting differently based on the visual demands of each task." Dr. Wallace's eyes lit up with understanding. "That could be incredibly valuable information for the surgery. If we know which neural pathways are compensating, we can better preserve them during the procedure." Mark watched the exchange, hope rising in his chest. The surgical team had been concerned about potential risks to Emma's visual processing centers, but this new insight might help them navigate more safely. "Dad," Emma tugged at his sleeve, "does this mean the glasses are helping plan my surgery too?" He pulled her close, marveling at how she could find excitement even in these clinical discussions. "That's right, kiddo. Just like Mom always said. ED, sometimes we need to look at things from a different angle." The treatment plan evolved rapidly after that. Dr. Wallace brought in a neuroplasticity specialist who was fascinated by the way Symphony Sight could map adaptive behaviors. Together with Sarah, they began documenting every subtle variation in Emma's visual compensation. "It's remarkable," the specialist said, reviewing the patterns. "We're essentially seeing her brain's problem-solving process in real time. This could revolutionize how we approach similar cases." Sarah spent hours with Emma, using musical exercises to help map different aspects of her vision. They discovered that certain pieces of music triggered distinct compensation patterns, providing a detailed map of how Emma's brain was working around the vascular malformation. "Think of it like learning a new piece," Sarah explained to Emma. "As they worked, your brain is finding alternative fingerings, different ways to play the same notes. We're just helping the doctors understand your unique arrangement." The medical technology company that had shown interest in Symphony Sight sent representatives to observe. What had started as an accessibility device was revealing new applications in surgical planning and neural mapping. Claire would be amazed, Mark said one evening, watching Emma practice piano while Sarah documented her movements. She always said technology should adapt to people, not the other way around. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had appointed herself Chief of Nutrition and Rest Enforcement, nodded wisely. Your wife knew that the best tools are the ones that help us understand each other better. Like my recipes, they tell stories of family, of love, of tradition. The surgery was scheduled for early morning, just as dawn would be breaking. The night before, they gathered in Sarah's studio for what Emma insisted on calling their victory practice. She played her favorite pieces while Sarah used symphony sight to make final documentation of her baseline patterns. For comparison after the surgery, Sarah explained, but Mark suspected it was also to give Emma a sense of continuity, a thread connecting before and after. Ms. Sarah, Emma asked during a break, will you help me learn to use the glasses like you do after I'm better? Dad says there might be other kids who could use our help. Sarah's hands stilled on the piano keys. Our help? Well, yeah, Emma said, as if it were obvious. You understand how to hear what the glasses are saying, and I understand how it feels to see things differently. We could be like translators. Mark watched Sarah's face soften with emotion. I'd like that very much, Emma. We could start a whole program at the school after the surgery. Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted firmly, appearing with perfect timing and a container of her special chicken soup. First, you rest and heal. As they shared this last meal before the surgery, Mark looked around at their unlikely family. Sarah, whose insights had transformed Claire's invention in ways they never imagined. Mrs. Rodriguez, whose practical love sustained them all. And Emma, so brave and bright, already planning how to help others. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight they had this moment, filled with music, love, and the quiet certainty that together they could face whatever came next. The surgical waiting room was eerily quiet at 5:30 a.m. Mark sat with his head bowed, Claire's journal clutched in his hands, while Sarah and Mrs. Rodriguez flanked him like sentinels. They had been there since 4 a.m., watching Emma being prepped for surgery, with a courage that brought tears to his eyes. Remember what we practiced? She had asked Dr. Wallace, her voice steady despite her fears. The glasses showed you where to look. That's right, the surgeon had smiled, adjusting Emma's surgical cap. Symphony sight gave us a very good map. Now it's our turn to follow it. The memory of Emma being wheeled away made Mark's hands tighten on the journal. Inside were his latest notes, detailed documentation of every pattern Sarah had detected, every insight that might help guide the surgical team through the delicate procedure. She has Claire's strength, Mrs. Rodriguez murmured, her rosary, beads clicking softly as they slipped through her fingers, and your determination. Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, but Mark could sense her intense focus. She had spent the past week working with the surgical team, helping them understand the subtle variations in Emma's visual compensation that symphony sight had revealed. The patterns were like a piece of music, she had explained to the doctors, each variation telling us something about how her brain was adapting, where it was struggling, where it had found new pathways. A clock on the wall ticked relentlessly. 2 hours into the surgery, Dr. Wallace's assistant came to update them. Everything is proceeding as planned. The mapping from Symphony Sight is proving invaluable for navigation. 3 hours. 4. Mark paced the waiting room, remembering similar vigils during Claire's illness, but this was different, he reminded himself. They had caught Emma's condition in time. They had tools Claire never had, insights that might have changed everything. Marcos, Mrs. Rodriguez called softly, come eat something. She had brought containers of food, insisting that they keep up their strength. The familiar smells of her cooking provided a strange comfort in the sterile hospital environment. Tell me about the first time you met Claire, Sarah said suddenly, her voice cutting through the heavy silence. You never told me how it all began. Mark sat down, grateful for the distraction. It was at a technology conference. I was doing maintenance work for the venue, and she was presenting her early research on sensory translation. Something had gone wrong with her presentation setup. He lost himself in the memory, describing Claire's frustrated attempts to fix her equipment, his offered help, the way she had immediately started brainstorming improvements to the venue's audio-visual system. Sarah listened intently, drawing him out, keeping his mind occupied as the minutes crept by. 5 hours. 6. The surgical team had warned them it would be a long procedure. The location of the malformation required extreme precision, each movement carefully calculated to preserve Emma's visual processing. "Dr. Wallace is the best," Sarah reminded him, "and she has something no surgeon has had before. A dynamic map of Emma's neural adaptations. Symphony Sight showed them exactly where to look, exactly what to protect. 7 hours. Mark had run out of stories. Mrs. Rodriguez had run out of snacks. Sarah had run out of questions. They sat in a tight circle, connected by worry and hope, and love for the little girl who had brought them all together. Finally, just as the morning sun was reaching its peak, Dr. Wallace appeared in the waiting room. Her surgical cap was still on, her face tired but smiling. "She did beautifully," she announced, and Mark felt his knees go weak with relief. The mapping from Symphony Sight was perfect. We were able to navigate around the malformation while preserving all the adaptive pathways her brain had developed. "She's in recovery now." Mrs. Rodriguez burst into tears of joy, her prayers turning to thanks. Sarah reached for Mark's hand, squeezing it tightly as Dr. Wallace continued explaining. "The procedure's success. There's something else," the surgeon added, her eyes bright with professional excitement. "The way we were able to use Symphony Sight's mapping capability, it could change how we approach similar surgeries. Your daughter's case might help. Countless others." Mark thought of Claire's journal, of her dream to help people see the world differently. She could never have imagined that her work would evolve to help surgeons navigate the delicate pathways of the brain, that it would help save their daughter's sight. "When can we see her?" he managed to ask. "Soon," Dr. Wallace promised. "She's already asked for her piano books. Something about practicing for a science fair presentation." Despite his exhaustion, Mark smiled. Of course, Emma was already planning her return to normal life. She was her mother's daughter after all, determined, resilient, and always thinking of ways to help others see the world in new ways. Emma's first words upon properly waking were surprisingly clear. "Everything's brighter." She blinked in the gentle light of the recovery room, her small face still pale but alert, like someone turned up the brightness on the left side. Mark, who had been holding her hand for hours as she drifted in and out of consciousness, felt tears spring to his eyes. Dr. Wallace, checking Emma's responses, nodded in satisfaction. "That's exactly what we hoped to hear. The pressure from the malformation was affecting your visual processing. Now that it's gone, you're seeing the world as you should." Sarah sat nearby, Symphony Sight in her hands. They had agreed to document Emma's recovery patterns, tracking how her brain adjusted to its restored visual capabilities. But for now, the glasses remained in their case. This moment was about Emma's own sight, her own experience of the world coming back into full focus. "Dad," Emma's voice was stronger now, "can you open the curtains? I want to see the sunrise." The morning light painted the hospital room in soft golds and pinks. Emma watched, fascinated, as though seeing a sunrise for the first time. "It's different," she whispered. "I didn't realize how much I wasn't seeing before." Mrs. Rodriguez appeared with perfect timing, carrying a basket that somehow made it past hospital regulations. "Ah, mi Angelita is awake, and just in time. These muffins are still warm." The familiar scent of cinnamon and vanilla filled the sterile room, bringing a touch of home to the medical environment. Emma managed a few small bites, each movement careful but determined. "Miss Sarah?" she asked, between mouthfuls. "Could you play something? In your head, I mean. I want to see if music looks different now, too." Sarah smiled, her fingers moving slightly as she recalled a gentle melody. Debussy's Clair de Lune. It seemed appropriate for a morning of new light. The doctors had been amazed by Emma's rapid recovery. "The brain's plasticity in children is remarkable," Dr. Wallace explained during rounds, "and having such detailed mapping of her pre-surgical compensation patterns helps us understand exactly how her visual processing is re-establishing itself." Throughout that first day, Emma's room saw a steady stream of visitors. Her teacher, Ms. Thompson, brought cards from her classmates and news that the science fair had been rescheduled specifically to allow Emma to participate. The surgical team stopped by frequently, each time finding new reasons to marvel at her progress. "The medical technology company called," Sarah mentioned quietly to Mark during a moment when Emma was napping. "They want to fast-track Symphony Sight's development for surgical applications." "Your brother," she smiled, still amused by calling her own brother Mark's, "is already working on the additional patents." Mark nodded, watching his daughter sleep peacefully. Claire would be amazed. She designed these glasses to help people see the world, but she never imagined they'd help surgeons see the brain's hidden pathways. "Oh, I think she knew," Mrs. Rodriguez interjected, straightening Emma's blankets with practiced care. "Not the details, perhaps, but she knew that helping people see differently would change lives. She saw it in you, Marcos, the way you looked at the world through her eyes." By evening, Emma was sitting up in bed, already planning her revised science fair presentation. "We need to add a whole section about the surgical applications," she insisted, her voice tired but excited. "And maybe we could interview Dr. Wallace about how she used the mapping." "First, you rest and heal," Sarah reminded her gently. "The science fair will wait." But they all recognized Claire's determination in Emma's enthusiasm, her desire to share their discovery with others who might benefit from it. Later, after Emma had fallen asleep again, Mark found himself standing by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the gathering dusk. Sarah joined him, her presence warm and steady at his side. "I can't help but think," she said softly, "that this is exactly what Claire meant about seeing the world differently, not just through technology, but through connection, through caring enough to look deeper." Mark thought about the journey that had brought them here, from late nights in his garage to Sarah's musical insights, from Emma's science project to groundbreaking surgical applications. Symphony Sight had become more than an invention. It was a testament to the power of seeing through others' eyes, of understanding different ways of perceiving the world. "Tomorrow," he said, watching his daughter sleep peacefully, "Emma wants to try the glasses herself. She says she wants to understand how others see the world so she can help them better. Like mother, like daughter." Sarah smiled, her hand finding his in the darkness, always looking for new ways to build bridges between different ways of seeing. Outside, the night deepened into a soft velvet black, but in room 315 of City General Hospital, light had already returned. 6 weeks after the surgery, Emma stood confidently before the science fair judges, Symphony Sight displayed proudly beside her presentation board. The audience included not just the usual teachers and students, but also Dr. Wallace, representatives from the medical technology company and a local news crew. "Symphony Sight began as my mum's dream," Emma explained, her voice clear and strong. "She wanted to help people see the world differently. And through my dad's work, Miss Sarah's insights, and a whole community of support, it became something even more amazing." Mark watched from the back of the room, Sarah's hand clasped firmly in his. Mrs. Rodriguez sat nearby, beaming with grandmother-like pride as Emma demonstrated the glasses' capabilities. "The breakthrough came when we realized that seeing differently isn't just about turning vision into sound," Emma continued. "It's about understanding how our brains adapt, how we can help each other perceive the world in new ways." The patent applications had been approved with remarkable speed. driven by the medical community's interest in Symphony Sight's surgical applications. The school board had already launched a pilot program for visually impaired students, with Sarah and Emma volunteering as advisors. In my case, Emma touched her fully healed incision, now hidden by her hair. Symphony Sight helped doctors understand exactly how my brain was compensating for a visual problem. It gave them a map for my surgery. And now, she smiled brilliantly, I can see better than ever. She went on to explain the technical aspects of the invention, the neural mapping capabilities, and the growing list of potential applications. But it was her conclusion that brought tears to many eyes. My mom believed that technology should bring people together, help us understand each other better. Symphony Sight didn't just help me see clearly again. It helped me understand how others see the world. And maybe that's the most important kind of vision we can have. The judges were visibly moved. The first-place ribbon seemed almost secondary to the impact Emma's presentation had on everyone in the room. Afterward, as they celebrated with Mrs. Rodriguez's special empanadas, Dr. Wallace pulled Mark aside. We've identified 3 more cases where Symphony Sight's mapping capabilities could be crucial for surgical planning. Your daughter's case was just the beginning. Mark looked around at his expanded family. Emma excitedly showing her ribbon. To Sarah, Mrs. Rodriguez distributing food with her usual loving insistence. Claire's presence felt in every aspect of their success. What had started as one woman's vision had grown into something far greater through the connections it created. You know, Sarah said later, as they walked home together in the warm evening, Claire's original dream was to help people see differently, but I think she'd be proudest of how it helped us see each other. Emma skipped ahead of them, her vision clear and bright, her future full of possibilities. Symphony Sight had become more than an invention. It was a bridge between different ways of perceiving the world, a testament to the power of understanding each other's perspectives. And in that understanding, they had all found a new way of seeing. 1 year later, Symphony Sight had transformed far beyond its humble garage beginnings. The medical technology company had developed specialized versions for surgical planning, while schools across the country were adopting the original, designed for visually impaired students. But in Sarah's studio, where it all began, the most meaningful changes were the smallest ones. Emma sat at the piano, playing a duet with Sarah, while Mark added notes to Claire's journal, now nearly full with 3 years of discoveries, insights, and shared wisdom. Mrs. Rodriguez watched from her usual chair, humming along as she knitted. The glasses sat in their case nearby, a bridge between different ways of seeing, a testament to the power of looking at the world through others' eyes. But it was the family they had built around them, born of love, necessity, and shared vision. That was Claire's greatest legacy. Some dreams, it seemed, had a way of seeing themselves home,